Welcome back to Believe in Jets, a New York Jets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Rami Lavi. The Jets have hired a defensive coordinator. And while I love the idea of the defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks, I love the idea behind the hire. I'm not so certain it is the right hire. Now, I will root for this one, and I will be cautiously optimistic about this one. But Steve Wilks is a guy who had head coaching experience, and the reason why I like the hire is because I do think anytime you bring in a first-time head coach, like you are bringing in, obviously with Aaron Glenn, you need to pair him with someone who has experience. You want experience on the staff. You want someone who's done it before. We heard rumors about them doing it for the special teams coordinator position, which I thought made sense because special teams is something where he kind of can freelance a little bit and help out the head coach. But we know Aaron Glenn already said, I'm not calling the defense. That's going to be on the defensive coordinator. I'm going to give that job to him. So to have the DC also be that veteran presence, somebody who's been a head coach in the league before, I like the idea. So I'm not shooting the idea. I just don't love this particular person. Isn't that the phrase, shoot the man, not the idea? Is that what it is? I might be wrong here on that. I don't want to misspeak, but I'm not shooting anyone. Let's be clear. But I don't love the idea of bringing in Steve Wilks, and for a very simple reason. The reasons he was fired in his last couple of stops just scare me. They frighten me. They don't scream the type of guy that you want to bring into this environment that is a tough environment to succeed in. I think everything is working against Aaron Glenn. Everything is stacked against Aaron Glenn as we stand. And that's not his fault. And that's the problem. This is what I keep talking about with Aaron Glenn. He's a first-time head coach coming into a terrible situation. None of this is on Aaron Glenn. This is not Aaron Glenn's fault that he's in this spot. This is the job he wanted. He has every right to be here. It's the story arc of his career. He started as a player for the Jets. He was drafted by the Jets. He then became a scout for the Jets. That's where his coaching career began. He obviously has love for Bill Parcells. He talked about on another, he went on, by the way, he went on Q104 or whatever, where the Jets play these days, the radio station. And I hate this. This is so stupid. Just bring in a sports guy to interview him. This guy reading off his Wikipedia page is basically interviewing him. The music jock is interviewing Aaron Glenn, and there are these generic questions. And I get it, it's on the Jets radio network. Just bring in Bob Wischusen, who does the games, to do a 10-minute interview if you want to do an interview of Aaron Glenn on your radio station because the Jets play on Q, whatever. Like, why are you having the music jock, the music DJ, interview Aaron Glenn? It was a nothing interview. There was 0 point to this interview. I watched the interview, and I'm like, I learned nothing. There was nothing to this. There literally nothing happened. And so it didn't make sense to me. But one thing he did say was that he was very close with Pete Carroll. He doesn't understand why he got fired after their 8-8 season. Pete Carroll drafted him. He loves Pete Carroll. Great. Okay. Really cool situation. He also understands they keep talking about Detroit like it's this pinnacle, like, oh, we reached the pinnacle in Detroit. We took a team from Loserville to the pinnacle. You didn't take them to the pinnacle. You made them less losers. They still lost their biggest games. They still blew a huge lead against San Francisco in the playoffs last year. They still got steamrolled at home by a rookie quarterback and Washington. Like, let's not act like Detroit is this great winning franchise, sustained winning. They have back-to-back years of making the playoffs. That's nice. It's not like the way we've elevated Detroit, or specifically Aaron Glenn and Woody Johnson have elevated Detroit. Makes no sense to me. It's mind-boggling. Like, the franchise is okay. They're in a better spot they were. They're still not this winning organization, winning culture. They haven't sustained any kind of winning. They've had 2 years where they won games back to back. They made the playoffs in back to back years. That's it. 2 solid seasons. They go to the playoffs. They have a huge lead in the NFC Championship game and blow it against San Francisco. And then obviously this game happens where they get steamrolled with an extra week to prepare. They get steamrolled at home by Washington and a rookie quarterback. Let's not make out Washington or Detroit. Let's not make out Detroit to be this incredible franchise. It's just not. That's not what it is. All right, that's my first issue. I don't even know where I was going with all this, but my point is, like, he has his work carved out for him in Aaron Glenn, and so he needed to bring in a veteran guy, but he brought in Steve Wilks, and Steve Wilks, who's had, if you look at his resume and you look up and down, it's like stop after stop after stop. He's never been in a place for more than 2 years. And so his most recent experience is head coach, obviously, with Carolina on an interim basis. He was also head coach in Arizona. It didn't work out. And then he was the defensive coordinator in Missouri and defensive coordinator in San Francisco. Each of those lasted only 1 year. And last year, he was unemployed. He was not in the league last year. This is the best veteran you could find. This is the best you could do as defensive coordinator, was a guy who was so great at his job, who wasn't even in the league last year. And you're bringing him into this delicate situation. And the reason why he was fired both in San Francisco and Missouri. When you read the comments, you read the quotes, were two things: terrible run scheme, their defense was not good against the run, and players on his defense were not giving strong enough effort. To come to a place like the New York Jets that has talent, that has struggled with effort and discipline for years, and now you're telling me that those two things, effort and discipline, which are the key cogs in what it takes to stop the run in the NFL, that's the guy that you went and hired, a guy whose teams have historically struggled with effort and discipline. To me, that's just, I don't know. It screams wrong hire to me. I hope I'm wrong. It's a veteran. It's what we wanted. We wanted a veteran guy to come in here as the defensive coordinator, to come in here and help out Aaron Glenn, call the defense, run the defense. I understand the hire. I think their mind is in the right place. I like it. I just don't know if it's the right guy for the job. That's all. We'll see. Time will tell as it goes on. A couple other hires they made. Chris Banjo, who played recently, and he's going to be the special teams coordinator. Obviously, most recently coached with Denver. It's interesting hire. I did see John Franklin Myers tweeted out that, he loves this hire. And one thing I do love is lots of former players. There's clearly a trend here. They want former players on the staff, which is, by the way, why there's a third name being thrown out for the offensive coordinator position, a name that we hadn't heard earlier, David Blow, who was on the staff in DC with Jaden Daniels under Cliff Kingsbury, which I love. I love that you're bringing someone who has a little bit of a different perspective than just, like, I don't understand. Like, if it was going to be Tanner Eggstrand already, I feel like he would have been hired already. This is starting to feel a little bit like the situation that we had with Newmark, where they wanted to hire Newmark just because of his relationship with Aaron Glenn. And it feels like if they were definitely going to hire him, that would have happened already. David Blow, I think it might be Blau, but David Blow played quarterback in the league for Detroit, actually. So that's where Glenn knows him from. And then he was working on the staff with Kingsbury, which I actually like because he worked with Kingsbury. Obviously, their success with Jaden Daniels in DC, that actually turned, like, I like that a little bit more, but he's never called plays in the NFL. It sounds like none of these guys that they're looking at have called plays. Still, to me, the number one guy I'd want them to hire is Nick Caley, who's the tight ends coach, obviously, but it sounds like Mike LaFleur is essentially saying to Nick Caley, don't do it. Whatever you do, don't go to New York. And can you blame Mike LaFleur for telling him that after the way they treated him? They basically blamed the failures of Zach Wilson being a terrible pick on Mike LaFleur. When every other quarterback, including Josh Johnson, had, success in that offense. Every single other quarterback who played in that offense had success other than Zach Wilson. Mike White looked like a freaking Hall of Famer in that offense for a couple of weeks. Still, no, we're going to blame Mike LaFleur. So I don't blame Mike LaFleur for being petty and not advising people not to go work for the New York Jets. That like doesn't shock me. It makes sense if I were someone who was treated like that with the Jets. But I do like the idea of lots of guys who were former players like Chris Banjo that can come in here and have this player mentality. There's supposed to be this toughness mentality, this player mentality. So again, I like what they're trying to do. I don't know that they are executing it to the best possible way, but I'm going to root for these guys, like I said. Now, speaking of Glenn and the David Blow and the Glenn connection with him, there's something interesting that came up. Bill Parcells was talking about a conversation he had with Mike Tannenbaum, or it was vice versa. Tannenbaum was talking about a conversation he had with Parcells on Thanksgiving already. And the conversation was about who would you hire if you were hiring the next head coach in the league? Who would you hire? And he said Aaron Glenn. And it almost felt like the Jets all along knew they were going to hire Aaron Glenn. So if you knew you were going to hire Aaron Glenn, you were waiting to make that hire to then bring in a GM. And that's possibly why you lost out on Borgonzi, a guy who was highly touted, a guy who people did want to see as the next general manager. And he ultimately goes to the Titans because you were waiting for the Lions to get out of the playoffs so that you could bring in Glenn. It felt like once the Lions got knocked out, the Jets started moving so quick. Like they already knew they were hiring Aaron Glenn. And it sounds like from Bill Parcells and Mike Tannenbaum, they already knew they were hiring Aaron Glenn. Like Tannenbaum, who was running the search, said back in November that the next head coach he hired would be Aaron Glenn. So this tells me that this whole thing, this elaborate search where they had all these candidates hired, like, interviewing candidates from freaking Maryland, it was all a farce. They were going to hire Glenn all along, which means they possibly lost out on other possible candidates for the GM job because they were waiting on Glenn to hire Glenn first. And that kind of pisses me off. Because while the Lance Newmark thing was obviously a sham, it was just a guy who worked with Glenn. And I kind of believe this. Giannotti said on the morning show he thinks that them reading Mike Fliegelman's tweet on the air and bashing Lance Newmark actually led to the Jets not hiring him. Because if you look at the timeline, Newmark and Glenn come to the Jets together on Wednesday. They're both supposed to be hired on Wednesday. Glenn gets hired Thursday. Newmark doesn't get hired. And then we don't hear from Newmark again. And then 3 days later on Friday, they hire Darren Muji, another guy who wasn't interviewing anywhere else. Like when they asked Darren Muji, why'd you take the Jets job? What was special about this Jet job for you? And he starts going into this whole elaborate, what was special? They're the only place that gave him an interview because he had some vague connection with Aaron Glenn. I don't understand hiring a guy just because he has a connection to Aaron Glenn. So clearly you knew you were hiring Aaron Glenn. If you were going to hire Borgonzi, which I think they wanted, that's who they would have brought in first. Oh, but once you didn't get Borgonzi, whatever, let's just go with someone who knows Aaron Glenn. I hope this guy Darren Muji works out. But when you think about the relationships, I talked about this a couple episodes ago about the relationships in the league and how the guy from LA goes to Detroit and then 2 weeks later they're trading, Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff for each other. It's an incestuous league. It's about connections and relationships. You think Darren Muji has relationships all around the league? A guy who wasn't interviewing anywhere else for a GM job? Like, I want to ask someone about this because this doesn't make any sense. I do plan on having a guest on the show who's more in the know, who I can ask about that because that doesn't make sense to me. I still would have preferred Alec Halaby. If you're the right-hand man in Philadelphia for Howie Roseman and over again, you're in these dealings with Howie Roseman and the league knows you and the league sees you as a Roseman guy, whether they like you or not, they certainly know they can work with you and they would trust you. And so to me, just hiring a guy because he knows Aaron Glenn just doesn't make so much sense. So again, it's coming together though. I still want Nick Haley. I doubt they'll get him. It sounds like it's going to be Tanner Ekstrand, but this David Blau thing has been thrown in here. So we'll see what happens at OC for the Jets. A really important hire too. You need someone who's forward thinking, but could he possibly need someone who's going to work with Aaron Rodgers? If Aaron Rodgers wants to come back for another year, I think he should. And I think a big part of that's going to depend on who the offensive coordinator is. So a lot of stuff going on with the New York Jets. But they hire a defensive coordinator. They hire an offensive line coach. They also hire a special teams coordinator. And again, Banjo, like, while I like the hire, I don't know, whatever, it seems fine. Players seem to like him. You're going from a guy who everyone loved in Brant Boyer to Chris Banjo, also because you were waiting. Like, there was this waiting game. And like I read somewhere that what happens is all these players or all these assistant coaches, not like the coordinators, but the assistant coaches are just waiting around. They don't know if they're hired or fired yet by the next staff. A lot of times there is, guys who stay over from staff to staff so that they could help with the transition to the new staff. And so they're waiting around to find out. It sounds like with Boyer, he was like, hey, I'm not waiting around for you guys to make your decisions on the next hire. I'm going to San Francisco with Saleh. Peace out. And that's what he did. So, it's unfortunate because this is a guy who was there, I think, since 2013 or 14. He's been there for a long time is the point, Brant Boyer. He's been there under multiple regimes, and I would have liked to have seen him continue, have some continuity with this Jet staff. But no, it seems like we're getting a full overhaul. So I don't know. The special teams, one thing that's actually pretty good about this team. We've had guys, throughout the last couple of years who have played really well in special teams. But whatever. So now Chris Banjo, we'll see how he does. I hope he does well. Listen, and that's the whole thing with the Jets. It's all hope and a prayer. So that's all I got on the Jets. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more, actually, NBA. We'll talk about the Knicks because, as you know, I am a big Knicks fan. And there's a lot to talk about with the Knicks. Lots to get to. So stay tuned. We got a whole lot more coming up on BLEAV in Jets right after a quick break. All right, coming back on BLEAV in Jets, I wanted to remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. The biggest betting weekend of the year is finally here. which means more updated odds and props for Super Sunday. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. We have hundreds of prop bets, MVP odds, and exclusive in-game live betting. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline offers you everything and more to enhance your game day experience. Visit the website today and make every game the day action count a little bit more. That's not English, but who cares? I think it's supposed to say make the game day action count a little bit more. There we go. Bet online, the game starts here. All right. After that incredible job, I will correct them, make the game day action count a little bit more. The people who write these copies should know that, sometimes there's typos. That's okay. But we just want it to be right. That's what we're here for. I want to talk about something. There's an interesting thing going on in the NBA. Adam Silver went on a show in the NBA, and I actually want to see, where was he talking? I think he was on the shoot. I'm going to forget the name of the show. It was that guy who does the school. What's his name? Dan Patrick. There we go. I remembered it. Yeah, it looked like I was looking it up, and I was, but I didn't get to it in time. I remembered it fast. So Adam Silver goes on the Dan Patrick show, and he's talking about shortening NBA games to 40 minutes. The reason for this is people want to see more superstars, and with all this rest and injury concerns, people are playing their stars less and less minutes across the league. So he figured if you shorten the games would have the superstars in a higher percentage of the game. Where you're wrong, Adam Silver. He also said, by the way, just another reason for it, he also said that he thinks the NBA games are on average 2 hours and 18 minutes now. He thinks viewing habits fit more a 2 hour window. Well, first of all, my first pushback, Adam Silver, is you know what fits viewing habits? That when something says it's going to start at 7:30, it starts at 7:30. It doesn't start at 7:42 one night or 7:37. Half the nights I turn on an NBA game and they're 2 minutes into the first quarter. Half the nights I turn it on and they're still 10 minutes before the game starts. I never know when the game's actually starting. Shh, it's a big secret. Don't tell anyone. I don't understand why they do this. It's always a big secret. So if you actually started the game on time, that would help viewing habits more than saving the 18 minutes of, oh, this is excessive, the extra 18 minutes of viewership. No, the extra 18 minutes isn't hurting anyone. It's not cutting it from 2 hours and 18 minutes to 2 hours isn't going to change your viewership. But if you started on time, that would help your viewership. That's number one. Number two, if you cut the games from 48 minutes to 40 minutes, then superstars minutes are just going to go from 36 minutes to 32 minutes. That's it. And you're just going to have less products for your fans to watch. Is that really the best way to sell your product to your fans? Is by having less product for your fans to watch? And now I agree. NBA games lag on, especially at the end of games. This is the biggest problem in the league. When you watch an NBA game, and I've talked about this so many times, talked about this on this podcast before, I've talked about it on TikTok, you can go look. The end of NBA games doesn't resemble anything you've ever seen in your life. It doesn't resemble basketball. The end of NBA games where everyone's just fouling and it's free throws and it's timeouts and it's stoppages and it's reviews. The game doesn't flow. All of a sudden you have this incredible back and forth game that you're watching, and all of a sudden it's commercial after commercial after commercial, timeouts, free throws, challenges. It's mind-numbing. And that takes 20 minutes, the last 2 minutes of a close NBA game. Close games should be the most exciting thing. Instead, it's so choppy. There's no rhythm. It's totally boring and impossible to watch. So instead of shortening the game by 8 minutes and shortening the game by 2 minutes per quarter, instead, you can make the last few minutes of an NBA game way more entertaining, and you can make your product way better in the process, and the games will still be shorter in the process. How do you do this? With target scoring. The NBA actually already implemented this. They've tried it out in the All-Star game. We've seen it before. And we've also seen it now in the G League since 2022-23 season, since the 2022-23 season. It's late. The NBA G League has been working with these rules, has been trying this out with what they call elam ending, which is the end of a game. There's a target score. They use it for overtime, where it's a game to 7 in overtime. Now, I think 7 points is too little, but they play a game to 7 once you hit overtime. It's called elam ending, and that's what they do. You have a target score. If a game is tied after regulation, there's no timer on the clock. Whoever gets to 7 first wins the game. There's no stoppages. There's no reviews. There's no thousand timeouts. There's no shooting free throws because why would you intentionally foul? The only reason you intentionally foul is to extend the game clockwise. There's no chucking up threes at the end of the game because the only reason to chuck up threes is because you're working against the clock. Whereas if you're not working against the clock, hey, lock the F in on defense, get some stops, and get some good possessions, good offensive possessions on the other side. There's nothing stopping you. There's no clock against you. I think the games will ultimately maybe be the same length, maybe a drop shorter because fewer stoppages, but the games at the end will be so much more entertaining. And it's a simple way to do this. Whatever team is up at the end of 3 quarters, you play 3 regular quarters, 12-minute quarters each. You have halftime at halftime. After 3 quarters, whichever team is leading, 30 more points than them. That's the end of the game. That's the target score. And you have this Elam ending. It would work perfectly for the NBA. Every time you play basketball on a court, if you're, I don't know, you go play pickup at the Y or you go whatever gym or basketball court you've ever been on in your life, if you watch children playing one-on-ones, game to 10, game to 11, game to 17, target scoring is part of the NBA. It's part of basketball. So why not implement it in the NBA? It makes perfect sense. I think it would make end of game so much more entertaining. Every single game would end in a walk-off. Even if it's a free throw at the end, even if it's a team that's up by 25 points, they have to hit a three to walk it off at the end. Let's say it is a 25-point game after 3 quarters. You could change it. You could say, hey, if you're up by 20 or more, then it's just whoever gets to 25 first, like 25 more than the team that's up by 25 points. You can come up with ways to do this creatively. They're already starting to do it in the G League, so I would implement it full time for regulation in the G League, see how it works, and then bring it up to the NBA because I think that's far better than cutting out 14% of your product from your viewership. Now you get 14% less. Are they going to charge you 14% less on tickets for the product being 14% shorter? No, they're not going to do that. By the way, the superstars, instead of playing more minutes, they're going to play only less minutes. We know that already. So I don't see why this is a good idea. I think it's a terrible idea. I think what they should be doing is they should implement this target score, 30 more points than the leading team. Not going to be fouls, not going to be timeouts. I think it's a great idea for the NBA. Elam ending, look into it. Target scoring. They've done it in the All-Star game, which no one watches because they've ruined that too. But they've done it in the All-Star game the last few years. I think it could really work for the NBA. That's the idea you should be looking into, Adam Silver, not just shortening the game by 2 minutes per quarter. That does nothing for nobody, just ruins your own product. All right. To the Knicks real quick, and then we'll wrap up. You hear a lot of people talking about the minutes police. And what I've heard recently, and this is the most moronic take I've ever heard, what I'm hearing now from the minutes police who hate Tom Thibodeau and somehow think that he's the one who's holding the Knicks back from a championship when he's the only reason they are championship contenders in the first place. Not the only, but he's the main reason why they've turned this franchise around and become championship contenders. All the players they brought in, Tom Thibodeau was the beginning of all of this. And people still seem to blame him. He's the one holding the Knicks back, the minutes police. We saw Josh Hart clowning on them also. Over the last 5 games for the Knicks, lots of people are saying, look, they're better rested. They've dealt with foul trouble for Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson, and that's why all of a sudden he had to open up the rotation more early on, and they're better rested at the end of games. They had more days off over the course of this stretch. They're playing so well because they're playing less minutes. No, you morons. They're playing well because they're a good team and they're gelling right now. They had a rough stretch. It happens. And it's actually interesting. I was at the Nets game and I was actually there. Quick story. I told you I was going to tell you the story like last week. I mentioned I was going to tell the story on the podcast. Here it is. I was at the Nets game with Evan Roberts, Tiki Barber, Sean Marash was not there, so I got to go. But I was there with Tommy Lugauer and Anthony Gallo, all from WFAN. It was really fun. We did the show live from there. We walked around with Tiki before the game, giving out free Tommy Lugauer t-shirts. It was pretty fun. And one of the people I met was Ian Eagle. Ian Eagle was there before the game. We interviewed him on the show, or I should say Evan and Tiki interviewed him on the show. And I was standing there, and he came over. He was so nice. And everyone said this about Ian Eagle, that he is one of the nicest people you'll meet in media. He comes over and introduces himself before, like when the interview's over, he comes over and introduces himself to me and the other producer standing there, which was really nice of him. Like, he didn't have to do that. And he stuck around and talked to us for a few minutes. And the nicest guy, super cool, and he's one of the best broadcasters of the game. He's actually in the open of the podcast. If you listen to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and we play that clip, he's the one calling the Bilal Powell touchdown. So it's cool. I have him in every open of the podcast. I forgot to tell him that, but I didn't even realize it until I was on my way home and I was listening to my own podcast. I was like, oh man, I should have told Ian that. But one of the things that happened was Evan Roberts has 4 season tickets, and I was the fifth man. I was the odd man out. So Ian goes, "Hey guys, where are you guys sitting? You guys going to sit in Evan's seats tonight?" And Gallo's like, "Yeah, we're going to sit in Evan's seats." And I'm like, actually, there's enough for four. I'm the odd man out. He's like, "So where are you going to sit?" I was like, "Well, I have my media pass, so I can really just, roam around, go to the media section, sit wherever." Also, I wanted to meet the radio broadcast people who I've worked with a lot, but never met in person. So I might sit with them. He's like, "Oh yeah, just you could probably pull up a chair and sit next to them. That would be super cool for you. Sit next to Carino and Capper. That's super awesome." I was like, "Well, actually, I was thinking, you're doing the game on TNT on the national broadcast tonight. I know you guys sit at center court on the hardwood. Maybe I could just pull up a chair on the TNT broadcast." And Ian, without missing, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll just tell the producers my friend Rami is coming down. Let me see if I can pull up a chair for you." And he was so cool about it. He's just funny and like went along with it right away. Of course, I did not test it. I didn't go downstairs to see if he would let me sit next to him during the broadcast. That would have been super cool, but I didn't happen. Instead, I did sit with the media, sat with the radio broadcast for a little bit, and then at about halftime, Tiki texted me, "Hey, I'm out of here. You can come take my seat." And I went and sat with Evan and those guys. But one of the things I said to those guys was, I think it was to Tommy and Evan. I said, "You remember the last time the Knicks played a really crappy game, but they found a way to win at the end? That was against Charlotte on Black Friday." And I mentioned this when I was on the Jake Asman show, who does obviously a great Jets show. You should go listen to that as well. I was on Jake Asman's show the next day after the Knicks Nets game, and I said, last time they won a game like this, that was just a rock fight. That was just a terrible win, but they found a way and got it done. Wasn't good. Was Black Friday in Charlotte. And they then went on a 13 out of 15 run where they won 13 out of 15 games. Could this start a run for the Knicks? And since that just ugly, nasty win against Brooklyn, where they feel like we're lucky to get away with a win, the 4 game winning streak since then, I mean, beating up on teams like Memphis. Look what Memphis did tonight without John Morant going up against Houston. That game was awesome, by the way. So a couple of things from that game real quick. Houston's final 2 shots were step back threes by Fred VanVleet. That's your best offense. Those are the plays you called. First, they were up 1 point and then they were down 1 point, and those were the 2 shots you took. Now, that doesn't make sense. This guy's not a high percentage 3-pointer percentage. He shoots a lot of threes, but he doesn't hit a high percentage of threes. That doesn't make sense that would be the play you go to. It just was mind-boggling. Then you have on the other side, obviously, Memphis, Taylor Jenkins, the head coach, doesn't call a timeout. The ref thinks he's calling a timeout, gives them the timeout. Ultimately, it interrupts them from getting an easy layup. He messed up. And Taylor Jenkins, though, does something really smart. So now they have the ball in the half court with 13 seconds. It's like, well, you know what? Now let me call up a play. And what does he call? He calls a post-up play for Jaren Jackson against, I think it was against Brooks, who had a couple of fouls at that point, or had 5 fouls at that point, and didn't, he couldn't foul. But it was like, I'm going to force the refs to give me a makeup call here. So they post up. He backs him down, turns around and shoots. And sure, there was contact, but with 8 seconds left in the game, are you always going to call that? No. But after you just took 2 points off the board for Memphis, Jenkins knew they would give them that foul call almost as a makeup call at that point. Even if it was the right call, it was ticky-tack, close call in that spot. You probably don't call it. But they did call it. They gave them the 2 points, or they gave them the free throws. They hit both. Now there's less time on the clock for Houston. Ultimately, the shot they get was that VanVleet step back three. The point is, by the way, the Knicks are going to see Houston also on Monday night at the Garden after they see LeBron and the Lakers on Saturday night. If you want to get into that building at MSG Saturday night for just like $800, you could go see the game. It's crazy. But Memphis without Ja beats Houston. Like 2 nights later, this is a really good Memphis team that's playing really good basketball, and the Knicks blew them out. Nikola Jokic, he wasn't great in that game, but Jamal Murray goes off. The Knicks beat them pretty easily. Like, I know it was close at the end, but the Knicks, it never got like really close. Every time that Denver went on a run, the Knicks answered back. This Knicks team is really good, and they are championship contenders. It's time to change the way we think about this Knicks team. They are the closest team to a championship in New York right now. And we have to think about how we have to change the way how we think about this Knicks team. And a big part of it is Tom Thibodeau. So for all the people who want to cry about the minutes, he changed this identity. He changed the culture of this franchise. He turned this franchise around. It's funny because Tom Thibodeau, coming to the Knicks would have been exactly like Mike McCarthy coming to the Jets. Two previous spots, they won a lot of games, but somehow the reputation was never positive about him. It's the exact same situation here with Tom Thibodeau. He had his two previous spots, always won, never won a championship, but the reputation just, not a great reputation. There's always a bad reputation, a bad narrative around him. And then he comes here and he totally changes the organization around, changes everything from the top down immediately. They become a respectable franchise. Players start wanting to come here. Boom, boom, boom. They are a championship contender today. That's what I wanted to see from the Jets. I wanted to see Mike McCarthy here for that reason. But okay, we'll see it again. First time head coach, it's an unknown. But the New York Jets, or the New York Knicks rather, they're real championship contenders. You know how I know? Just one last thing. You know how I know they're championship contenders? Look at their starting rotation in 2K. This is just a by the way. This is so stupid, but like to me, this means a lot. Jalen Brunson and and Karl Anthony Towns are both rated 93. The other three guys in their starting rotation, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges, all 85. Like, whoa, this team is that good. No one under an 85 in their starting five. That's crazy. Like that, like I never got to play with teams like that when I played 2K as a kid. I mean, this is awesome. And by the way, Josh Hart should have been an all-star. He is an all-star. I'm glad he's going to get the rest. He doesn't have to go. Great. But he is an all-star. Let's not get it twisted. All right, last thing I want to talk about is it does sound like Pete Alonso is going to sign with the Mets today on Friday. So when he signs with the Mets, they don't have any use for Jose Iglesias because they already have two third basemen, right? Because you have Beatty and you have Vientos, who are going to play third base. They're going to want to leave DH somewhat open so that they can put Soto, Alvarez, Pete, all those guys in there. So they're rotating. There's not really a spot on this team for Jose Iglesias. I don't understand why the Yankees don't sign Jose Iglesias. They don't want to sign Alex Bregman because he's too expensive. Okay, fine. Don't sign Alex Bregman. Sign Jose Iglesias. You want to get back at the Mets? The Mets' whole identity, they're still going to Knicks games playing OMG. They're still playing OMG and holding up the sign at Amazing Day. They have Iglesias' jersey from the concert hanging on display. Like, it's really weird that they're still rallying behind this song. Their whole identity is still this song, and the guy's not on the team anymore. So you want to steal their identity? The Yankees could just take Jose Iglesias from the Mets. Just like that. They could take him. He'd be cheap. He fills a need that you have. You're really going to go into the season with Oswaldo Cabrera and DJ LeMahieu as your option at third base. He's a utility infielder. He can at least battle with those guys. And when they're eventually going to be hurt or slumping, in the case of LeMahieu hurt, in the case of Cabrera slumping, you have a solid bat who brings immaculate vibes to this team. I don't understand why the Yankees they're not even linked to Jose Iglesias. He should be a Yankee tomorrow. That's my last bit. Until next time, like, subscribe, share the podcast. I appreciate everyone for listening. Believe in Jets. Rami Lavi. Follow me on all social platforms. See